Morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I think you can hear me. Just confirm in the chat or just to make sure you can hear me.
Very well.
Okay, many thanks, Jerome. We are very happy to welcome you in this Power of Data webinar. That's a very good opportunity to talk about the initiative and also about all the opportunities that are linked. Just as an introduction, I wanted to share the information that I will moderate this webinar in French. And as Lydia said, this is an opportunity for me to remind you that this webinar is translated in both French and English. You can enable the feature by clicking on More at the bottom of your screen, and then you can choose Interpretation to pick the translation needed. So please use the chat if you have any information needed about the feature, and I think Lydia will facilitate. So I switch to French now. Donc merci une fois de plus d'être tous présents pour ce webinaire. Juste pour m'introduire rapidement, je m'appelle Gabriel Bourbon, je suis chef planification, suivi et évaluation au sein du bureau pays de l'UNICEF Togo. J'ai eu l'opportunité d'être engagé dans l'initiative Power of Data suite à l'engagement du pays, du gouvernement du Togo au sommet des ODD en 2023. Suite à cet engagement, nous avons eu des échanges au niveau technique avec l'Institut national de statistique, les différentes parties prenantes sectorielles et les partenaires présents dans l'initiative. Donc, il y a eu des échanges, des rencontres à l'international, notamment des visites des points focaux. Et tout ça, ça a mené à notre niveau au Togo à un événement de pré-lancement de l'initiative en juin dernier, qui a été une opportunité de pouvoir identifier des thématiques de travail, mais aussi surtout de pouvoir renforcer le réseau autour des données. L'avantage de cette initiative-là au niveau du Togo, c'était le fait d'avoir des parties prenantes multiples. Donc, il y avait le réseau académique, le gouvernement, évidemment, les Nations Unies et également la participation des ONG et de la société civile. C'était une opportunité, évidemment, pour aborder des points clés sur les données. C'est ce qui nous regroupe aujourd'hui. Et donc, un des points clés, c'était de pouvoir renforcer ce lien entre producteurs et utilisateurs des données, de pouvoir approcher les données à travers une approche cycle de vie, pas seulement dans la production, mais du design jusqu'à l'utilisation. Tout ça pour établir une masse critique. Et donc, c'est là où la dimension de partenariat sur les données est critique, parce qu'on a tous un rôle à jouer pour assurer qu'on va pouvoir produire une masse d'évidence suffisante pour prendre des décisions et informer l'évolution de la situation. Donc, c'est vraiment tous ces éléments-là qui nous regroupent aujourd'hui. Peut-être avec l'appui de Lydia, je voudrais vous rappeler rapidement l'agenda du webinaire d'aujourd'hui pour vous présenter les intéressantes présentations qui vont avoir lieu suite à mon introduction. Dans un premier temps, on va avoir une overview sur l'initiative Power of Data, qui sera présentée par Frédéric Mugisha et Victor Orogo, que je vais introduire juste après. Par la suite, on aura la chance d'avoir la perspective de la part gouvernementale, avec un intervenant de la part du Ghana, professeur Samuel Kobina à Nîmes. Et dans un troisième temps, nous aurons la perspective justement du côté des ONG, avec Florence Seivo, qui est directrice exécutive du forum SDG au Kenya. Après, nous aurons évidemment une phase de questions-réponses qui sera animée par mon collègue Frédéric Mugisha, qui, je pense, permettra de clarifier tous les points. Et nous pourrons conclure finalement le webinaire avec les mesures aussi prospectives. Voilà tout ce qui nous attend à travers cet agenda. Et juste avant d'introduire la première session, je voulais vous rappeler qu'évidemment, comme je l'ai évoqué, pour toutes les questions, vous avez la possibilité de les laisser dans le chat pour qu'on puisse les prendre en compte au moment de la session Q&A, ou de les garder et vous pourrez intervenir directement lors de la session qui est dédiée. Un élément important par rapport à l'objectif effectivement du webinaire d'aujourd'hui, comme j'ai dit, il y a tout cet enjeu autour de l'initiative, de pouvoir explorer la mise en réseau, le partenariat et tous les éléments techniques que j'ai présentés. Mais le but quand même aujourd'hui, c'est de pouvoir favoriser la collaboration entre les différentes parties prenantes de cette initiative et justement de pouvoir mettre, comme je l'ai évoqué, de mettre un focus sur les pratiques qui existent et aussi sur les opportunités qu'on peut identifier ensemble pour l'implication des ONG et des organisations de la société civile dans cette initiative. Comme je vous l'ai dit, au Togo, on a justement eu une implication dans l'identification des thématiques techniques et de la mise en réseau lors de l'événement de juin avec les ONG et la société civile. Ça a permis d'avoir une perspective différente et d'avoir justement cette approche, en tout cas d'identifier des pistes cycles de vie. Et donc, c'est vraiment une opportunité ici assez importante à travers les différentes présentations d'engager les différents acteurs parce que la question des données est une question de tous, les parties prenantes même, les détenteurs de droits, les ONG, le gouvernement, le secteur privé, etc., etc. Donc, sur cette introduction, je me fais le plaisir de transmettre la parole à mes collègues Frédéric et Victor pour la première présentation sur l'overview de l'initiative Power of Data. Juste pour vous les présenter rapidement, Frédéric Mugisha est conseiller en matière d'intégration des objectifs de développement durable au niveau du service régional pour l'Afrique pour le PNUD. Il travaille évidemment en étroite collaboration avec le Bureau de la planification et de la mise en œuvre stratégique au sein du cabinet du président de l'Union africaine et il est membre du groupe de travail technique sur l'agenda 2063 et il est basé à Addis Abeba en Éthiopie. Welcome Frederick. Concernant Victor Oregou, il est Senior Regional Manager pour l'Afrique au niveau du partenariat mondial. Il dirige les engagements politiques et techniques pour permettre de catalyser les progrès et de renforcer l'écosystème de données. C'est vraiment dans la continuité de l'approche que j'évoquais. Et ça permet d'aborder les questions qui sont liées aux données pour le développement durable à tous les différents niveaux. Et donc, Victor est à la fois basé au Nigeria, à Lagos, et à la fois au Canada, à Waterloo. Welcome, Frederick. Welcome, Victor. And over to you for the first presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Lydia, please share the presentation. Okay, so this is going to be in two parts. One is I will share with you a few thoughts, and then Victor will come. Next slide. So the question is really why data? And for you, for some of you who are already in that space, you don't need a lot of introduction. But I will say a few things on this, and then I will share with you as well a few experiences as I go along. Next slide. It is about why this was initiated in the first place. Because in 2023, in fact, half of the SDG targets were on track. 15% of the SDG targets were on track towards 2030. But actually, if you also look at the different countries and also the African continent, for example, at that time, 12% of the targets that were set in Agenda 2063 had been achieved. So the idea is to use data as a fuel that powers progress across not only the transitions as you can see there, in terms of food systems, energy, digital connectivity, education and jobs, but also to be able to help achieve, make progress significantly across the countries that we are working with. Next slide. So there are some estimates that it is a good investment in terms of economic impact. But even if that was not the case, as I will show you on the next slide, what data can do is much, much more than the benefit to get. I will, right now I'm talking from Burundi, and Burundi has a vision 2060 to become a developed country. But if you think about what data can do, is that it can allow Burundi to begin to think about things that they can do now so that they're in the process of being a developed country by 2060. And the decisions that they make now become very important. But I also want to say that we have discovered that actually when you think about long term, now it becomes easier for you to use data, not only to make the decisions now, but also to begin to look at the rules and roles that you can tweak. Because as you probably know, the whole world is governed by different rules. Some are written, some are not written. But when you give it a chance and a space, then you are able to help identify those rules that have to change now for you to get what you want in the future. So in a way, what we are trying to say is that the strong data systems can drive progress towards achieving the development that we want. As you know, the SDGs are delivered through the national development plans, both medium term and long term. And this becomes very critical for us moving forward. Finally, on this point, if you look at the development plans across the continent, you find that there are three things that I keep emerging all the time: jobs, public services, quality of services, and value addition. And to say that data across all sectors, wherever we want to imagine them, can help us to identify how best other sectors can contribute towards these priorities that are emerging across the continent. Next slide. One thing that we can all say is that there are some limitations that we can deal with. And some of them are, for example, chronic underinvestment. And I think it helps, and maybe when some come on, it helps to actually become very focused in terms of or trying to identify those spaces that you can achieve the most in terms of how the entire system works. But also, we sometimes think that there's lack of political will, prioritization, and I think that it's a catch-22. It has to do with the fact that the data that we have not user-friendly in a political sense, but also the politicians may not demand the data that much. And so we need to push across on both sides. Next slide. So I just said this already, that we can overcome them, we can overcome these challenges because they are actually solvable. They are not very difficult problems to address. Next slide. So let me say a few words about the power of data. Next slide, please. So this, I mentioned it from at the beginning. This was really pulled together in 2023, and it is a platform to help us build the data systems that we need to achieve the SDGs in each country. And the good news is that once we move with the SDGs, we are already moving, that implies that we are already moving on our national long-term and medium-term development plans. And the idea is to rally around national priorities for data system strengthening, mobilize political support and investments that would allow us to move the needle, and strengthening partnerships, collaboration, and coordination. I have to say here that since we are engaging with civil society, is that sometimes there are two ways. One is to say we are holding government accountable, but sometimes it is also helping the government, protecting the government in a way, because if the systems don't exist, then it becomes a job to advocate for those systems to be there. If they exist, then it becomes your job to hold them accountable. But maybe you can also hold us accountable in terms of making sure that the metrics are there that at least are enabled for government to generate the data that is required. Next slide. So the whole point really is that this is requires national leadership because it is at the center, and the way the development agendas are structured, really the biggest role goes to the governments. But it is also it also helps that we are building on existing plans and ensure that we convene all stakeholders for strategic and coordinated action in support of the priorities. I want to say that a better coordination alignment will maximize existing investments, and it will also allow us to mobilize additional investments in data systems. Then finally, we think that this represents a new way of doing business that helps maximize the impact of every project and program and leverages new financing whenever it exists. Next slide. So I had mentioned this already, which is basically to say national leaders convene key actors behind a single national vision. And when some speaks, it may point to this. Then the idea is collectively identifying opportunities and challenges based on national priorities, so we can all make a contribution. The resources are there. We have to pull them together in a way. And then finally, leveraging the national and global platform of the power of data mobilize support, both existing support, but also new support. Next slide. So this is to say that we are several players on this. I'm from UNDP, Gabriel is from UNICEF, there's the World Bank, there's the UNFPA, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, UNDESA. And so the idea is that really we work together in a collective to make sure that we have some level of coordination across the development sector. Next slide. So value addition of civil society So one of them I had mentioned, which is really to say, if you're already working in this space, you are either pushing a little bit on the advocacy front in terms of holding the government accountable, but there's also a possibility that you can help for governments or for institutions where the structures are not non-existent to be able to help prioritize and push for them to become operational. One of the things that I like is that the use of this data also becomes very important because you create a critical link to the communities and groups, and therefore this helps a great deal for us to move forward with the data. Next. So I want to hand over to my colleague Victor to continue. Victor, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frederick and Gabriel. Allow me to also stand on existing, already established protocol. So in terms of the progress that we've made to date, you'll recall that this initiative was flagged off towards the end of September 2023. And so in the first quarter of 2024, we had rapid engagements across countries in both Africa and in Latin America and the Caribbean. Please, next slide. And today, there's been a number of results across these countries. 10 countries across both the LAC and Africa region have hosted, the national data partnerships as part of the Power of Data convening at those countries. 5 countries in Africa launched in the first quarter of 2024. There is a tremendous commitment that's been made by the World Bank in terms of investment to support data priorities in a number of countries in Africa, including Botswana, Nigeria, etc. There's a global fund, it's the Global Data Fund from the World Bank, also being leveraged to enable a number of African countries tap into the big data that sits in the mobile sector, and as part of the contributions that could come from the private sector to support the development of data for SDGs. Of course, there's been tremendous, increase in political advocacy in the region as well, both within the region and at country level. Next slide. Right, and so we've seen, all of these results in the early parts of 2024 this year and across, the year as well. We've got a number of more countries asking about what this whole concept is about and, indicating interest to join in. Next slide. I'm aware I have just about 2 minutes. So specifically, we can see some, traction at country level. Botswana is one of the countries that launched in March of this year and is a very strong, supporter of the Power of Data initiative. The government and the people in Botswana are keen to integrate, and currently it's going on right now. They're integrating the Power of Data work plan into the National Development Plan, the NDP 12. The UN within Botswana is also aligning its development, cooperation framework with that work plan. The World Bank is making a couple of commitments in terms of the support that it intends to make with the government. And there's a broad conversation around aligning some of those commitments with the AU Vision 2036, particularly with regard to the commitment of 0.15% of MDA's budget, the ministries, departments, and agencies' budget to data and statistical development. Ghana is a very classic example of what we've seen in Africa. We're always very proud to speak about the progress that Ghana has made. Ghana is leveraging the Power of Data to engage broadly the development community, the private sector, and they have set up a couple of priorities, which includes the establishment of a data statistics and policy observatory that will be supported by all members of the ecosystem, development partners, private sector, civil society, academia, etc. They are looking at capacity development with regard to data science, machine learning across all of the MDAs and at the subnational level. And they're also pushing the issue of data revolution, asking for political advocacy, to promote statistical profiling, policy evaluation, the use of AI, and all of that should be driven by data. Ghana has also signed, MOUs with about 15 MDAs as at now with regard to the sharing of microdata, and they strongly believe that this effort will help accelerate SDG progress through political support, resources mobilization, and collaboration generally. Somalia has also launched. It was quite interesting to see Somalia launch early this year. Next slide. In Cape Verde, next slide. Yeah. Cape Verde, is one of also the champion countries, and it's quite important to note that Cape Verde, from the Portuguese-speaking part of Africa, is one of the first, PALOP countries. They call them Portuguese-speaking African countries to have launched. They have highlighted 14 core commitments and priorities that are, staggered or divided across strategic, political, development, and economic issues. And they are using, this commitment to drive, engagement across all tiers of government. They've gotten, substantial nod from the Prime Minister's office, the Vice Prime Minister's office, the Minister of Finance, the development communities. The UN is fully aligned with the process that's ongoing in Cape Verde. Next slide. So in terms of what we're looking to, achieving in the next year, a number of countries are reaching out and saying, that they are keen to launch the power of data in the country. Malawi came on board just late this year, and they have signed up to the power of data. They just had their launch late September or so. Namibia, Sierra Leone wants to launch immediately. The Minister of Planning and Economic Development have signaled interest to launch, and they have moved their launch to February. We'll be having launch in Nigeria as well in the first quarter of next year. And a couple of other Portuguese-speaking African countries have signaled interest, including Sao Tome and Principe. Okay, Nigeria, allow me to welcome Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, Angola, and Mozambique have also signaled interest in joining and advancing and using the power of data to advance progress on the SDGs. We will be working with a number of these countries next year to support their process for the development of a costed concept, note. We took that out of Ghana. Ghana was and is the first to lead that process. They've conceptualized the key issues. They've costed it. The conversation is hugely ongoing within the development communities, and we're sure that sometime in 2025, Ghana may be able to secure funding. And this is well driven by Professor Inim and his team. And I'm glad that Prof is here today. And we're using that process, to motivate several other countries in Africa. And hopefully we'll use that process to support them in developing their own concept notes and have it costed and then move into conversation within the development communities. We're also hoping finally to have more engagement with the private sector next year, including financial institutions, mobile network operators, because of the huge infrastructure in terms of data asset that sits within their domain that could be leveraged to advance the SDGs. Thank you. I hope I'm within time. Over back to you, Gabriel.
Many thanks, Frederick and Victor. It was very interesting. And just as a reminder, because I think a lot of people joined the meeting, it is translated both in French and English. So if you want to enable the feature, you can just click on more at the bottom of your screen, and then you click on interpretation, and you will be able to choose the language needed. Merci beaucoup, Victor et Frédéric. Juste un tout petit bilan rapidement de toutes ces présentations qui donnent beaucoup de bonnes perspectives. C'était important effectivement de rappeler la notion de système, qu'on se doit d'avoir une vision concernant les données pour éviter d'avoir des interventions isolées, et que avoir cette approche système-écosystème, c'est une des clés pour pouvoir faciliter la prise de décision concertée. Autre élément important, c'est effectivement cette approche fit for purpose, faire les choses parce qu'elles ont du sens et pas parce qu'on est habitué à les faire. C'est vraiment un des éléments clés, je pense, du pourquoi de cette initiative. Autre point important qui a été présenté par Frédéric, c'est cette notion du leadership des pays. C'est les pays qui se sont engagés dans l'initiative, et donc il y a vraiment cette question du commitment autour d'une vision nationale, et c'est vraiment un des éléments forts, je pense, de cette initiative-là, pour atteindre les résultats, mobiliser les investissements nécessaires, et surtout, comme on l'a vu, pouvoir avoir cette approche élargie avec un commitment et une coordination de tous les acteurs impliqués, de la population jusqu'aux décideurs gouvernementaux. C'était aussi très intéressant de pouvoir avoir une première idée de la valeur ajoutée au niveau des NGO, des éléments concrets. Ça va être développé plus tard, mais avec effectivement cette proximité avec les communautés, ça fait penser aux notions de redevabilité, d'inclusion. Et aussi, merci Victor de faire le point sur les progrès avec quand même un certain nombre de lancements au premier trimestre 2024. Et on voit tout le lien et toutes les bonnes perspectives. Un des points clés, selon moi, d'après ce qui a été présenté, c'est aussi la notion de perspective digitale liée à la transformation qui se fait dans le monde actuellement. Et je pense que ça fait aussi écho en tout cas, ça montre l'importance aussi de travailler sur la question de l'éthique au niveau des données. Voilà, juste un peu des sujets de réflexion. On a vu que le Ghana était un des pays champions avec un engagement large, et justement cette ouverture derrière avec l'utilisation pour des policy briefs, l'IA et d'autres pays qui s'engagent. Et donc, c'est avec plaisir que je passe la parole au professeur Sam Anim pour nous présenter justement un petit peu la perspective au niveau du gouvernement au Ghana et nous faire part de toutes ces bonnes pratiques. Anim, il occupe le poste de statisticien du gouvernement au service statistique du Ghana depuis 2019. Il est également professeur d'économie à l'université de Cape Coast au Ghana. Euh, il travaille sur toutes les dimensions scientifiques avec la question de la qualité des données pour le développement. Il soutient aussi de manière assez passionnée le programme de développement national et mondial. Euh, et il travaille également avec la Commission nationale de planification du développement. Il contribue à l'amélioration du système statistique national du Ghana et collabore avec plusieurs organismes nationaux. Et évidemment, il est basé à Accra au Ghana. Euh, Over to you, Anim, for the presentation. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues. It's always a delight to join in a conversation around power of data, especially when we have a group of our partners from the civil society organization community joining us on the conversation on the power of data. I think Frederick and Victor have highlighted most of the issues that I'm going to talk about, but I'll proceed with my submission with the fact that all this that we're talking about has to do with finding the need for something to change and changing your mindset away from what you've been doing in the past. And some of the things that Frederick and Victor have highlighted points to the fact that we're really at a point where we need to change our mindset. And that is exactly what I'll try and do with my first three issues. In terms of the initiatives to tap the promise of the power of data in Ghana, I think Victor has highlighted some of the issues, so I'll spend about 7 or so minutes on the first issue. So in line with what I said earlier on, if we really want to get around the conversation on the power of data, my point of view is that you need to have some operationalization of the definition of what a power of data is. Yes, Frederick and Victor have contributed to the general understanding of what a power of data is, but any country that wants to chart that path would have to set its own parameters and understand the limits, the opportunities that surrounds that. So that is the first slide that I'm going to talk about. What has been highlighted both from, I think, Gabriel, Frederick, and Victor is the issue of partnerships. So I want to talk about attributes of effective partnerships. So not just something that is passive, but thinking about partnerships in an effective way and the things that you need to think about. Then I'll share with you, from my point of view, the global rationalization and effort so far, which most of you might be aware of, but what I call the compelling case for Africa, for which it requires a change of mindset. So as I said, these are the issues that I want to cover in the next 10 minutes. So what I do here is to operationalize the definition of the power of data, which I characterize it with, sorry about that. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
It's gone off from my end. Thank you. Which I characterize it with 7 Ps. And I'm careful with the use of the word promise because I always want to associate the power of data with two sides of the coin, because data can be used as a destructive element. And Frederick, as you rightly said, we were initially thinking about data to power progress. And our definition of the power of data is the ability of data to power progress. And this is where we need to think about data being used in its right way. Both of you talked about the political action, and this is really the centrality of the conversation around the power of data. But Victor, one thing that you said, which is very critical, is not only the political action around it, but how we deepen private sector participation. And as you rightly said, the mobile network operators present a potential opportunity for us to harness the data landscape around mobile phone data when it comes to call detail records. And colleagues CSOs who have joined this call, my 5th P, 6th P has to do with the potential of all other stakeholders. And I'm going to show you in the next minute why we have to take this seriously. And I'm happy Frederick talked about the issue of transparency and accountability from the perspective of CSOs. Then the 7th P has to do with the effective partnership that I talked about, and I'll share with you what the attributes of it. So how we have operationalized the power of data is the promise of the power of data is harnessing political actions, deepening private sector participations, onboarding the potential of all stakeholders in the data statistical ecosystem through effective partnerships for development. So I'm going to go through the actuals around this definition. So on this slide, what I try to do is to just give you 10 issues that you need to think about if you want to make partnerships effective. And time will not allow me to go into the details for each of them. But one of the things that I said earlier on is you don't treat partnership as passive. You don't treat partnership as you receiving benefit. There should be a clear definition of commitment on the players around the table and what each other is bringing on board. You need to appreciate the hierarchies because partnerships do not work laterally or vertically, but you need some sequencing that you need to go through. There are complementarities around it. So at the end of the day, you need to go through all these 10 issues. And the last issue that you need to think about is how are you measuring the effectiveness of partnerships? Last month, we were at the United Nations World Data Forum, and I categorically made the point that any partnership that is not measured is not worth following. So if you really want to think about the effectiveness of partnerships, after you've gone through all the issues which we can expand, you need to end at the end of the day by saying that, yes, I've achieved impact, but what is the extent of impact? Yes, it has enhanced my processes, but to what extent has it done that? And that is what those of us in the statistical community, we do. But this is critical for our colleagues within the civil society community because ahead of the SDGs in 2015 was the data revolution agenda, which had 6 pillars. And this is what I'm calling the global rationalization. The 6th pillar, which I've circled in red, which touches on liberating data for transparency, falls directly within the purview of civil society organizations. And I've highlighted and added the issues of accountability. So globally, we've rationalized how civil society is critical to the data revolution process. Last month, when we met at the United Nations World Data Forum, we delivered the Medellin framework, which is coming on the back of the Cape Town Global Action Plan, and it has 4 areas for concentration. If you look at the last area, which is on partnerships, it's really reflecting the power of data for effective partnership perspective. And as has been highlighted by my colleagues, it's partnership to mobilize resources and coordinate effort to develop the statistical capacity landscape. And this is exactly the conversation that we are having when it comes to effective partnership. What makes a compelling case for Africa? Again, I've highlighted 8 issues here. I would not have the chance to go through all of them in detail, so I'm going to be very selective about it. The first point we all know, our development trajectory continues to fluctuate, making it cyclical. But the second point is what I want to highlight. All of us on this call would associate ourselves with the fact that funding to data and statistics is suboptimal. But what is more concerning is the fact that it's skewed and it's uncertain. And what we mean by is skewed is that any data production investment that we see is from the perspective of how do we get more data sets, relegating to the background the wide scope of the data statistics, monitoring, evaluation, policy development landscape. So if we continue to skew funding in such a way that data is limited to only the production side, we wouldn't get the value of data. The fourth point which I want to also highlight is the use of statistics, and I give it 4 characterizations. It is low, we all know that, but the fact that it is restricted aligns to what I said earlier on. And the last 2 points which I want to highlight is the fact that it is selective and uncoordinated. So now we see a lot of policymakers, government in this part of the globe choosing and picking which statistic to use. And the fact that ministries, CSOs, NGOs, national statistical offices are putting out statistics and using statistics in an uncoordinated way. And this is exactly what the power of data seeks to do. So yes, we appreciate the fact that it's low. We appreciate the fact that it is restricted to only monitoring, but the 2 other attributes of the use of statistics, which the power of data seeks to fill that gap, is the fact that it's selective and uncoordinated. If I take you to the previous slide on the Medellin framework, the second pillar has to do with the use and value of data. So we talk about the use of data a lot, but we don't talk about the value of data. And this is what is missing because we don't even know the value of it. And part of the reason is that we have skewed its use. We have funded it only through some limited areas. But the whole conversation where CSOs come to the table to support us in this regard is the reuse of data. So we produce the statistics, we tell you what it is, but how CSOs can add value to the use of data is when they reuse it for transparency and accountability. I'll jump the other 2 and go to the last point, which I think either Frederick or Victor highlighted it. We are really in contemporary times where we need to manage the transition from a data drought to a data deluge. Gone were the days where we said that we didn't have data. But now every action of ours, data is a byproduct of it. So we are in a world of data deluge. So now we have an expanded pool of people who are giving us data. And in the next few months and years, we're going to see people sitting anywhere telling us this is what it is, without going through the fundamental processes of transitioning from data to statistics. So if we don't get CSOs on board around the conversation of power of data, we'll be swayed by the fact that every data is capable of leading to a policy outcome, which will land us in a situation worse than where we find ourselves in. So there's really a compelling case for Africa because this data deluge that is happening is really out of the hands of those of us in Africa. Because if you think about where Google is situated, if you think about where all the footprints that they are picking on us is situated, we are not within that space of governance. And this is where we need to take the power of data carefully. So as I indicated, these are the things that have been done in Ghana. Victor, you've mentioned some of them. So again, I wouldn't spend time on this. I'll just jump to 2 quick examples to sort of put into action what we really mean by the power of data. On this slide, what I try to show you is, 1, getting to the realization that the complex problems that we have, the cyclical problems that we have, can only be resolved when we have a clear sense of a micro data architecture and integration. So what this slide is telling you is that if we don't push for power of data to get to the point where the architecture is clear to enable us integrate data, as I said initially, with the expansion in the scope of people who are providing data, is going to mess up the statistics production phase. So here you see at the base, the fundamental data that we need, the first level, the second level, and the third level. As you can see, we recognize the fact that CSOs also hold a lot of data. But how do we carefully, architecturally, fit the data from CSOs into the scheme of things so that we can solve that problem where we say that data statistics is uncoordinated and it's not harmonized? So this is the architecture that we've started talking about, and we've presented this to the development partner community, the government ministries department community, and this is the pathway that we think we need to go through to ensure that we can get a good architecture integrate data properly so that we can see the value of data through effective partnerships. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Samuel. C'était vraiment très intéressant d'avoir cet exemple concret. Je prends des notes pour le Togo, beaucoup d'informations très utiles. Je vais rapidement passer la parole à la dernière intervenante, comme le temps presse, mais qu'on prend quand même le temps de faire bien les choses. Concernant la perspective via les ONG, c'est Florence Sevio qui va intervenir. Elle a eu l'opportunité de travailler dans un grand nombre de coalitions et elle se consacre vraiment à la lutte contre la pauvreté et les inégalités. Depuis 2006, elle a coordonné les initiatives relatives aux objectifs du millénaire pour le développement dans un premier temps, avec le ministère kényan, de la dévolution et de la planification. Et puis, à partir de 2016, elle est devenue la coordinatrice nationale du Forum des objectifs de développement durable au Kenya. Donc, ça permettait de diriger les efforts qui vont favoriser les partenariats pour l'agenda 2030. Elle travaille sur les questions de plaidoyer, de politique, de recherche, de mobilisation. Elle est basée évidemment à Nairobi au Kenya. Florence Sevio, over to you.
Thank you very much for this invitation, Global Partnership for Sustainable Data. Of course, my previous speakers really set the stage in terms, and I hope you can hear me, please confirm. Yeah, you can hear me?
Sure, we can
Yes,
hear
we
you
can
well.
hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, just to appreciate previous speakers and more importantly, the conversations around why civil society really matter in this conversation if we are talking about the power of data and what needs to happen at country level. And because at the end of the day, when you think about data, we are talking about local communities, how do we integrate them into these systems, and why this data is produced. As you all know, governments spend a lot of money on data. And so it only makes sense to make sure that we can link data to the right conversations. We can link the outcomes of data to what communities are going through, what participants or people in different places would want this data for. And so as I start my intervention, it's just to appreciate this launch of the power of data. And for me, I see it as a way to unify data players at country level. And so we are looking forward to, of course, really domesticating this particular movement at country level here in Kenya. I see a lot of my colleagues online from Kenya, some even already sharing very vibrant work they've done. And maybe most of you have heard about the vibrancy of civil society organizations here in Kenya. And I come from the SDG Kenya Forum, which is a coalition of civil society organizations that are championing SDG 1 to SDG 17. And these are very diverse organizations, from women rights movements to peace and security organizations, energy, organizations working on data, organizations working on issues of children and marginalized groups. And so this conversation is a very critical conversation from where I sit. And so as we move into this conversation, we first and foremost need to ensure, as one of the previous speakers said, that there can be local ownership and domestication of this power of data initiative at country level. And of course, this should not be left alone to governments, because I've seen many initiatives many times that are left to a few stakeholders, and then that means then you don't get the desired results. So then how do we domesticate this? I agree with the operationalization. And this has to make sure that when we are coming together, and of course, as Kenya, the conversation is already here, supported by the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, is bringing the relevant stakeholders to the table, and for us, customizing that which works for Kenya. Yeah, and so it's good to see that which has worked for Ghana, what is working in Togo and other countries, but it's good to really make sure that it reflects the realities that are currently within the country level. And so this is something that we are already having conversations. There's already some goodwill, there's a lot of goodwill, and it's now more importantly for us to synergize also on existing things or movements or investments that have already happened. And so it's important for us to make sure that we don't just look at what's new, but also come from a point of mapping out what is already existing, and then now linking this to the Power of Data Initiative, because there's already very goodwill. There's a lot of investments. There's a lot of bits and pieces of work that has been done by civil society, or a lot of pieces of work that is done, of course, by the national statistical system. There's a lot of work that is being done by different players, big data that are not even within part of this conversation, but they have the data. So then how do we come jointly? How do we ensure that we can, number two, foster partnerships? And so for us, for example, the issue of partnerships, we've come to a point where more and more our NSO, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, is appreciating partnerships from civil society organizations. And we've seen this where, for example, the SDG Kenya Forum and the NSO, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, recently signed an MOU. And within this MOU, we are talking about how to advance citizen-generated data. How can more civil society organizations understand or build their capacity in terms of what they need to be engaging in, how they can, for example, regroup within their thematic areas, how they can showcase the work they are doing. It doesn't have to be a lot. It can be whatever you're doing as an organization, whatever investments that you're making, and you can showcase that. You can link that to the national processes. And so this is very important. So the partnerships is what is critical at national level, because this of course leads to collaborations. When you partner, you define collaborations. And so we need to more and more see collaborations. And this is something that we are, of course, figuring out what would be a good way of citizen-generated data. There's already bits and pieces. We have few resources here and there. How then can the NSO with different development partners, different civil society, bring the bits and pieces jointly for the investments to really work? Because of course, if you talk about power of data, you're talking about figuring out what can work for the country. And then as we move again into my third submission, it's on issues of advocacy. As you all know, civil society organizations, this is a very, very central area. We want to use data for evidence-based advocacy. We want to use data for us to showcase where our marginalized groups are at, what is happening to them, how more resources can be allocated to them. We want to use this especially within our voluntary national reviews, our SDG status reports. And so, for example, Kenya has done its 3 VNRs, and this year, 2024, we did our 3rd VNR. And of course, throughout the 3 VNRs, you'll find an individual standalone civil society report that civil society submits. What is it they are doing, and maybe the challenges and gaps they are facing. And so this is something that is very, very critical. And for us to get the Power of Data initiative correct, we have to ensure that civil society have the space and the opportunity to carry out the advocacy, because we are looking for evidence. We are looking for, it's about corruption, for example, which is a big thing in many African countries. We are talking about how do we prevent corruption? How do we detect corruption? How do we report, on issues of corruption? I've just picked corruption as an indicator, and there's data that is really required in many African countries. How do we prioritize on that? And I know there are many challenges when it comes to data around corruption, just because of obvious reasons of the people involved, and many times it's interested parties in very influential places. And so this is data sometimes that is very elusive. How do we master some of this that can really talk about sustainable development of a country? And then, of course, again, on the advocacy and linking this to the voluntary national reviews, Kenya, for example, is reporting on 168 indicators out of the 243. And so for us as civil society organizations, one of our big push, one of our advocacy points is to ensure that Kenya can have more data sets for the SDG reporting, because the minute we are able to report on a lot of the indicators, this means we are not leaving anyone behind, or we are not leaving some issues behind. Then how do we ensure that the Power of Data initiative can constantly provide the opportunity for us to identify indicators, especially under tier maybe 2, that, you know, there's already an agreed methodology, but the frequency of the data production is what is a challenge. And so this is something that would be of great interest, working together with the NSO, working together with the ministries, while ensuring that where there are data sets, be it in big data, be it within citizen generation data, that can also be included in the SDG indicators. And then again, I'd also want to talk about the capacity building aspect as I conclude. And this is one of the areas that we need to acknowledge, that a lot of civil society organizations have a lot of gaps. This is because most of us are not maybe statisticians, or maybe do not have the background of you know, data and statistics, yet we require use, and we want to be at the forefront as data champions, as data, you know, receivers, or people who utilize data that is produced by government or by, you know, different entities. And so the capacity building is an investment that is required. And so one of my biggest advocacy points is to ensure that there can be a lot of capacity building resources to ensure that a lot of the data champions, you know, understand, maybe even if it's CGD, there's already guidelines here in Kenya. One of the challenges we are facing, we agreed in 2021, and we have citizen generated data guidelines. But now getting civil society organizations to uptake these guidelines is a big challenge, because maybe they don't have the right capacity, or sometimes just the right people who could do the work. They have maybe technical expertise in other areas. We have technical expertise in other areas. And so now reprogramming, coming up with new experts to do this kind of work, it needs a lot of resources, and you know, structuring your funding and opportunities and priorities. And only a few organizations have that kind of priority in terms of maybe data. How then can we build capacity? How can funding be flexible in providing opportunities where data capacity building can be done for civil society, but also for other sectors that are already going on? And so I want to maybe point out that I have colleagues here. I see Groots, I see somebody called George, and they've shared very good pieces of work that have been done by civil society organizations here in Kenya. And I would urge all of you to maybe just look through and see the creativity and innovation. Also go to our website, or SDG Kenya Forum, and you'll find you know, the VNRs and a lot of pieces of work that showcase that it's possible for us to have collaborations with civil society organizations, and for us to advance advocacy, for us to advance sustainable development goals. We only have 6 or less years to go, and we need to be able to come together to figure out what needs to be done. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Florence. Vraiment une très intéressante intervention sur la question des data champions et l'implication avec les VNR. Je pense que c'est beaucoup d'éléments intéressants. On va pouvoir revenir dessus dans le wrap-up à la fin du webinaire. Merci à tous les intervenants. On a maintenant l'opportunité, et malgré un petit peu le retard, de prendre quelques questions. Vous avez la possibilité de poser les questions dans le chat, ou également de pouvoir lever la main pour pouvoir prendre la parole. C'est une opportunité importante de bénéficier de la présence des différents collègues qui sont intervenus, donc n'hésitez pas. Au moment, je ne vois pas de questions dans le chat. Si jamais vous voulez lever la main, pour ceux qui ne sont pas habitués à Zoom, vous avez React et Raise Your Hand directement. Peut-être pendant que vous préparez les questions, c'est l'opportunité de vous partager l'information concernant, vu qu'on parle de partenariat, il y a un QR code qui est disponible pour faciliter la participation à un forum et de pouvoir partager des différents insights sur le partnership des données au niveau national. Donc je sais que Lydia, voilà, va partager ce fameux QR code. N'hésitez pas à le scanner pour avoir les différentes informations et pouvoir contribuer justement à toutes ces dimensions de partenariat qu'on évoque depuis maintenant 1 heure et qui semble être le ciment de cette initiative. Je regarde s'il y a des questions. Pas de questions dans le chat. Ah, nous avons une question. Merci Nazir. Donc Nazir nous pose la question. What are we doing to overhaul existing laws that prevent access to developmental data in developing countries? Is there any other question? So we can, okay, I think we can answer to that one in the first place. Frederick, Victor, or other colleagues, do you want to take that one? Or maybe we can have the experience from the Ghana country, Professor Anim, if you feel comfortable with the question.
Yeah, I think Prof could help.
Yeah, might be better.
Prof, are you here? Okay.
Yes, I'm here. So we're referring to the question in the chat, which reads, what are we doing to overhaul existing laws that prevent access to developmental data in developing countries? Is that a question?
Yes, please.
Okay, yes, I'm very happy to speak to that. And I look at this from two perspectives. So one of the things that we did in Ghana about 5 years ago was to be conscious about re-looking at our legislation. So in 2019, we had a new Statistical Service Act that really sort of paved the way going forward. For those of us that we are yet to get to that process, another window of opportunity is the strong advocacy to rethink data governance, statistical governance, or think about data and statistical governance together as a legislative process. Even for a number of us in African countries that have clear or renewed or revised Statistical Service Act, we are not conscious about issues around statistical and data governance. And with the expansion in the scope of players that I talked about earlier on, it is imperative for all countries to begin to think about a legislation on data governance, a legislation on statistical governance, and one that clearly sort of distinguishes between data and statistical governance. If we mix the two, we're going to have challenges going forward. The third option for us, which we are pursuing in Ghana, is if you have a new or a revised Statistical Service Act, you need to rely on your legislative instrument. And this is exactly what we are doing. We are rethinking our legislative instrument in a way that it would sort of bring clarity and pave the way for data to be used and accessed in a better way. Most of the part, I think, is not only about the legislation, but the functionality of the national statistical system as well. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Samuel. Chris, that was a very good question, and the options you shared are very relevant, and it made me think about your presentation and the way you talked about the value of data, and that's also an entry gate to advocate to ensure the availability of data, and rethinking the statistical governance in a good way, in my opinion, to contribute to ensuring availability of data. Do you have any other question? I can see an hand raised. Akbar Yukakbor, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. My name is Agbo Ayok Obo Jr. and I'm from Cameroon. Thank you very much for the presentations. I very much learned from the different speakers, and I assume that Cameroon is not part of such platforms, and but I also understand the place of data and how much power that data has. So my question is, how do you deal with ethical considerations in the course of collecting this data, and how inclusive are these data? Because the assumption is that when you when you build a scope around data in terms of maybe developing specific indicators that the data is supposed to reflect, you may tend to lose out maybe some specificities. So how do you deal with that? How do you make sure that the data is inclusive and you do not find yourself in a situation where you leave out certain maybe experiences or certain things which could be as well important?
Okay, many thanks for the question. I would like Would you mind, Professor Anim, to answer that one too? And also,
Sure,
Florence,
Gabriel.
if you feel comfortable to go ahead after Samuel, it would be appreciated.
I'm happy to do that because, again, as you rightly indicated, these are the fundamentals of the conversation around the power of data. And I really like that question that is relating ethical issues, inclusiveness. And my first response is that it's all about getting into the world of co-creating data. We are really moving away from international organizations defining for us what data to produce, governments defining for us what data to produce, and who is producing the data. And Frederick or Victor, one of you talked about the citizen-generated data. So really where we are headed as a data and statistical community is a place where data is co-created and is not an agenda set by only one particular party. And that is where the issue of effective partnership comes in. And this is, again, where I talked about the hierarchies, the lateral, and the sequencing of partnerships, so that you, at any point in time, functionally make sure that you have all the people around the table. And I think my colleague from Kenya also highlighted that. Gabriel, I think the other thing that we need to doing this in practice is that code of ethics and practice. A number of national statistical systems within countries don't have code of ethics and practice. And even if they have, it is restricted within the space of the National Statistical Office. But we really need to put into use what we mean by the National Statistical System. And once we are clear in our minds on what the National Statistical System is, the code of ethics and practice will do that. I think, Victor, you can also help us by talking a bit about the Inclusive Data Charter from GPSDD, which we have benefited a lot from it, so that in all our surveys, in all our data collection exercises, we oblige with the guidelines for the Inclusive Data Charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. Victor, do you want to take the floor to talk about the inclusive data?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Prof, for that. Yes, very quickly, the global partnership, together with a number of countries and multilateral institutions, did launch the Inclusive Data Charter sometime in 2019. And since then, there has been global advocacy, opening this opportunity up to countries across the world. And basically, just saying that, look, inclusive data is central to achieving the leave no one behind agenda. If we must represent every, segment of our population and the realities of all people's, lives, we need to do that better through data that is properly disaggregated, especially when we look at the poor, marginalized, vulnerable, underrepresented, hard to reach people in our various, settings. It's important that we must make sure that they are fully represented. And so we had Ghana, we had Kenya, several other countries signing up to the Inclusive Data Charter and ensuring that the 5 core principles of the Charter are enshrined within their data collection, processes and, the tools that are being used to collect data. And this would indeed help to, highlight and ensure that there is a better promotion or prioritization of data disaggregation, looking at, further including people in terms of, the way data is being collected and data is being used, and enabling advocacy around data and inclusive policy. So in essence, the IDC is a huge, program that any one of you civil society partners who are here can also take advantage of and see how this could benefit your data processes at the country level. Thank you. Over back to you.
Thanks, Victor. Florence, do you want to add anything?
Yes, just to agree with my colleagues and not maybe repeat, just to say that, again, we need to be cognizant of the fact that data is very political. And so many times, especially in the African context, we still have politicians or presidents who want to utilize data just to sort of influence demographies or just influence their own stories in terms of gaining political mileage and so forth. And I think this is something that we need to continuously figure out how to ensure that data can be used for the right purposes. but more importantly, can speak for the communities and we can advance development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. I can see that Akbarayuk had a follow-up question. As we are running late, I will suggest maybe for Professor Anim or other colleagues to enter directly in the chat while I'm wrapping up, if you don't mind. Very interesting question, but I think as we are running late, it's better to go like this. Merci beaucoup pour toutes ces questions qui sont très intéressantes et toutes ces présentations. Avant de conclure la réunion, je pense que c'est important de pouvoir rappeler quelques points clés de la présentation pour ceux qui peut-être avaient loupé le début et vraiment pouvoir se rappeler toutes les idées fraîches. Le premier élément qui a été présenté par notre collègue Frédéric, c'est justement cette approche système, pouvoir réfléchir avec une vision et interconnecter les différentes composantes liées aux données pour pas avoir des approches isolées. Le deuxième élément, c'était de pouvoir justement avoir une approche fit for purpose et pas être dans le business as usual. Ça fait appel à des dimensions de priorisation, de changement systémique. Maintenant, comment ça se retrouve dans l'initiative Power of Data, ces principes? Évidemment, c'est le leadership des pays, mais ça a été évoqué par d'autres. Ce leadership des pays, il est important, mais avec la participation des différents partis. On a vu l'importance du secteur privé, qui est souvent oublié, mais également des NGOs avec les dimensions de redevabilité, de proximité avec le terrain. Et aussi de facilitateurs de liens entre la production et l'utilisation des données. Donc, il y a vraiment des fenêtres d'opportunités importantes pour l'engagement concret des NGOs et de la société civile dans cette initiative. C'était important, effectivement, d'avoir aussi les progrès concrets que Victor nous a présenté, parce que c'est pas juste un concept, il y a des réalités sur le terrain et notamment avec des conclusions comme l'investissement de la Banque mondiale. Juste pour rappeler aussi au pays qu'il est jamais trop tard pour s'engager dans l'initiative. On l'a vu avec l'intérêt croissant de 5 nouveaux pays. Par la suite, on a eu la chance du coup d'avoir l'expérience concrète du Ghana. Et là, je voudrais remercier encore le professeur pour son intervention très riche. Comme je disais, vu qu'on est des pays voisins au Togo, je prends note de beaucoup d'éléments. Je pense qu'un des points clés, c'était vraiment de se dire qu'il y a l'initiative globale, mais que chaque pays peut en faire sa propre définition et peut s'approprier l'initiative à ses propres fins, ce qui est un élément clé vraiment, je pense. Comme je disais, d'assurer la participation du secteur privé. Et j'ai beaucoup aimé également la dimension d'opérationnalisation des partenariats. Souvent, effectivement, on parle de travailler ensemble, mais tous les critères, justement, de définition de partenariat vont permettre de pouvoir rendre ça concret. L'engagement, la portée, le timing, la complémentarité aussi au regard des mandats des organisations. Tout le monde a quelque chose à apporter, comme on l'a dit plusieurs fois, mais c'est essentiel de pouvoir se poser ces questions-là pour avoir un partenariat pratique et pas un partenariat seulement théorique. Merci vraiment, professeur, pour cette présentation-là. La question de la valeur des données, je pense, est essentielle. C'est un outil de plaidoyer très fort et ça permet de concrétiser une vision, ça permet d'assurer ce lien entre producteurs et utilisateurs et également, comme vous l'avez évoqué, de pouvoir faire appel à des innovations, l'IA, le machine learning, etc. Et donc forcément de faire le lien avec les données éthiques. Et là, je suis obligé de faire le lien forcément avec les données désagrégées, les données sur les enfants, les données sensibles au genre, sur les différents types de vulnérabilité pour pouvoir, comme ça a été évoqué par Florence, ne laisser personne derrière. Il y a une phrase que j'aime beaucoup qui avait été expliquée par notre précédente directrice régionale, c'est nous aider à voir ce qu'on ne voit pas. Et donc les données doivent, pour moi, jouer ce levier-là avec tous les éléments apportés par les différents collègues. Florence nous a également parlé des différentes dimensions de partenariat, aussi de renforcement de capacité, de plaidoyer, et vraiment l'opportunité de l'expérience des VNR et du rapport individuel des CSO, je pense, montre des possibilités ou des opportunités pour faire part de spécificités et de l'importance de l'engagement de la société civile, mais également de fait d'avoir des data champions à tous les niveaux qui vont pouvoir porter les initiatives. et engagés également, comme on a à avoir des leaders. Je remercie également les personnes qui ont posé des questions avec des questions à la fois sur le cadre des données de gouvernance qui est extrêmement important avec là des clés sur le fait d'avoir une approche législative et également rappeler aussi justement toute cette dimension de, que les données sont également politiques et qu'on doit aussi considérer cette dimension-là par rapport à notre différents scopes. Voilà, j'espère que ce wrap-up a été complet. Je voudrais remercier vraiment tous les intervenants pour ces informations de qualité. Vous remercie aussi pour l'opportunité de modérer et tous les participants pour votre intérêt, pour vos questions dans le chat. N'oubliez pas le QR code si vous voulez continuer à avoir des informations. Évidemment, comme je le rappelais en début de conclusion, il n'est jamais trop tard pour s'engager dans l'initiative. On a tous un rôle à jouer et, et n'hésitons pas à rester en contact, même entre les pays, pour faciliter la collaboration sur les données. Voilà, je vous remercie beaucoup pour la participation. On reste en contact et à très bientôt pour d'autres éléments et d'autres informations et d'autres discussions sur l'initiative Power of Data et comment ça se concrétise et ça s'opérationnalise sur le terrain. Merci beaucoup. Pendant que vous êtes en train de quitter, voilà, Victor et d'autres collègues sont en train de partager des informations dans le chat. Évidemment, vous aurez accès à l'enregistrement, donc n'hésitez pas à reach out. On reste en contact et merci beaucoup. Très bon après-midi.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Thank you.